Hey friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com. In today's video, I'm going to be combining two of my favorite passions besides my family and grandchildren and children. And that would be combining classic film with tarot. Now, I love classic film probably as much as I love tarot. In fact, I've frequently toyed with the idea in my own mind of creating a separate channel just for classic film and discussing it because I love it that much. But I don't really have enough time in a day. I have my business, my tarot business. I do these videos, and I just don't see that I can spread myself extra thin by doing another channel with classic film. But I'll put this out there. If any of you do have a classic film channel and you ever want to talk to somebody about classic film, and you can trust me enough to believe that I know enough about classic film, I would love to be a guest. And especially if you have a conversation about Casablanca, which is the conversation of this tarot video. My passion for classic film began much like tarot did, and that was as regarding it as an art form. Yes, it's true. I saw tarot on television as a kid, and I remembered the deck, and I remembered what it looked like, and I remembered it being so cool. But it was really, as it turns out, as I mature and understand myself, I was really responding to the art and the mystery that's in the art form of tarot. And so when I went to professional art school, which was my passion, art was my passion, right? I wasn't an art major, much like somebody goes to law school or medical school. They aren't a medical major, or they aren't a lawyer major. Everything they take in those dedicated schools is about law or medicine, right? So when you go to a professional art school, everything you take is about art, so there is no art major stuff about it. You're enveloped and surrounded. Everything you take is art. So there were some art history courses, which I took art history every semester I was in art school, which really makes me kind of a geek because I just love art history in any form, And one of my favorite courses in art history was film. I loved film. Now, I don't remember what the film classes were called. It could have been like, art and film or something like that, or film. I don't even remember what it would have been called, because in those days I went to art school in the 70s. I graduated in 1980. So the films from 1940 were only 30 years old, right? Now it's 82 years old. Casablanca is like 82 years old. But at the time that I went to, art school, Casablanca was only, 30 some years old. Ooh, that's sobering, right? And but I'll tell you the truth. I don't think I ever saw Casablanca in my film class. And the reason I don't think I ever did was, one, I don't remember it. Shame on me, I don't remember seeing it there. And then the other reason was because the professor who taught this particular class I don't think he thought Casablanca was the greatest film ever made. He kind of like instilled in us that Citizen Kane by Orson Welles was the greatest film ever created. And so when I left the school, when I graduated, I just had it in my head, like from learning from art history classes, that Citizen Kane was the greatest film ever created, And I don't know if he never showed Casablanca, so we never saw it there, I never even knew about it, or if I just dismissed it as he might have by thinking, oh, it was just a silly love story and it's not like just fluff kind of stuff, And, but it wasn't until 2007, all those years later, that sorry for the interruption. My husband came to the door and I wanted to answer his question. So it wasn't until 2007 that my husband, who I met in 2007, and we were courting one another. And in those days, you could go to like a Blockbusters to get a movie for the night, and he was like, let's go to Blockbusters or whatever the store was, and let's get a movie to watch. And so he picks Casablanca. He says Casablanca was the greatest film ever made. And I'm like, oh, no, Citizen Kane is the greatest film ever made, right? And he's like, girl, you watch Casablanca and you'll walk away saying it was the greatest film ever made. So I watched Casablanca and I've been hooked ever since. Now, I'm not going to argue. I think Citizen Kane is probably technically, it is a marvel, you know, and it was a film like it had never been seen up until that point. And I think it was a marvel, you know. And Casablanca has so many plot holes and so many it's imperfectly perfect. And that's why I think it's got the edge on Citizen Kane. Another way that I can convince myself that I prefer Casablanca over Citizen Kane is that maybe I've seen Citizen Kane 3 or 4 times in my life. I've seen Casablanca, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say 100 times. And that's only in the past 17 years. We're not talking about 40 years from, you know, when I became aware of Casablanca. I only became aware of it in 2007 when my husband, my boyfriend at the time, said, let's do Casablanca for the night, you know, for the film. So since then, I've watched it, you know, like for example, just yesterday I watched it 3 times. And then this morning before doing the video here, I watched it already, you know. So I'm not saying that I've watched Casablanca 3 times a day, every day, but I've watched it a lot. And there are days when I've watched it 3 or 4 or 5 times, you know, and I watch my favorite films over and over and over and over and over again. And I'm constantly picking up, especially with Casablanca, I'm constantly picking up things that I never caught before. I'm picking up plot holes. And there's a million plot holes in this movie. You know, there's a million reasons why it's imperfect, you know. But, you know, the plot holes, you don't care about the plot holes, you know. And every time I watch it, I catch innuendo in dialogue, or I catch parallels between characters that you just gloss over and you don't catch it, you know, until you see it several times. And then the dialogue, that, you know, you want to see a movie that's got the best dialogue. This is the film. This is it. So I can go on and on and on and on about why I think Casablanca is a great film. If it's not my favorite movie, it's one of them, you know. And it sounds like I'm a terrible cliche. Like, what's your favorite movie? Casablanca. Everybody says that. But, you know, it really is a great film. Now, the film is 82 years old, you know. We've had a lot of opportunity to watch it. But if you haven't seen Casablanca, because you may be young, you know, you just may have not even heard of it before, you owe it to yourself to pause this video. Don't continue watching because I don't want to spoil anything for you. So spoiler alert, go watch Casablanca and then come back to this video, because I'd be doing you a disservice to ruin the plot for you. Now, how am I combining it with tarot? Well, I have 2 questions about the protagonist of the story, Casablanca. The protagonist of the film is a man named Rick. Rick is an American. He is an American who owns a cafe in Casablanca, Morocco. The time period being, well, the film was released in 42, but I'm thinking that it takes place prior to 42, because in the course of the story, in the very beginning of the story, Rick is playing chess by himself, right? Which tells us something about who he is, right? He plays chess by himself. And in his dialogue, he comments that America's asleep. Everyone in America is just sleeping. And we don't necessarily recognize it as a political statement, but we learn as the film progresses that it really is a political statement. And for this reason, when he says America, everyone in America, all around America, they're all sleeping, I think it's because, you know, of the political stance, you know, the United States had in not involving themselves in the war. And it would probably happen, this story probably takes right before 1942, because for America to be asleep December 7th, 1941 probably didn't happen, right? Because once December 7th, did I say another date? I meant December 7th. Once December 7th, 1941 happened, America woke up. You know, we woke up. So I'm thinking that the story takes place prior to 1941. And okay, so who is Rick? Rick is, as I mentioned, the protagonist. The beginning scenes, Rick is in his cafe in Casablanca, but as the story unfolds, we realize that he had a love interest. And when he was a few years earlier, he had a love interest with a woman, and they met in Paris. And apparently they fell very much in love, and it was a mutual thing. They were very much in love. But the day that Germany invaded Paris, we learn a few things through a flashback. We learn his story about this woman in a flashback. And in this flashback, we understand that Rick is in grave danger if the Germans infiltrate and take over Paris. For some reason, he's in grave danger. They don't tell us what the danger is, but we know that that day, was the last chance that he'd have to get away, to escape before the Germans put a kibosh to anybody escaping. So they determine that the last train of the day that they can take and get out of there is at 5 or 5:30 in the evening from Paris to Marseille. And the film outlines that once they're in Marseille, the safe passage would require them to go to Juarez, and from Juarez to get to Morocco, and then from Morocco to specifically get to Casablanca. Because in Casablanca, that's where you can take a plane to get to Lisbon. And apparently Lisbon was one of the few channels or the few places that you could escape to the United States from Europe. So Lisbon was the goal, you know, to get, and to get to Lisbon, you had to go to Casablanca. Now, interestingly, Rick escapes from Paris, does the route that he's got to go, but he doesn't leave Casablanca. You know, once he's in Casablanca, he sets up this cafe. Everybody comes to Rick's, right? That's the name of the play that this film is based on. So Rick is extremely popular. Everybody goes to Rick's, Rick's cafe. So Rick has a shitload of money, right? And if he wants to pay for passage to leave and go to the United States, he can. He definitely can. But he chooses not to. So he sort of dead ends himself in Casablanca, which makes me think he doesn't want to go back to the United States, you know? And then throughout the course of the film, we learn that there might be reasons why he doesn't return to the United States. You know, he becomes friends with Louis, who is Louis Renault, who is the chief of police of Casablanca, which was at that time under Vichy France's rule, which hadn't quite succumbed to Germans yet. I get the feeling that Vichy France was tolerating German influences, just trying to keep the peace without taking too much of a stand, just so that Germany doesn't bother them so much. But what happens, of course, is that, when a bully comes and infiltrates your land, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. But at any rate, in conversation with the captain of the police force in Casablanca, it comes out that not only would the Gestapo or the Germans have a problem with Rick, but Rick can't go back to the United States. And so we learn from Louis Renault that there's a secret surrounding Rick. And, he could easily go to the United States, and he hasn't chosen to do that. So Renault says, I have 3 theories. Either 1, you absconded with church funds. 2, you ran off with the senator's wife, or 3, you killed somebody. So, those are the 3 things that make me think are the reasons why you can't go back to the United States. So without confirming, any reason, Rick only answers, it's a combination of all three. So we get the sense that whatever he did, it's enough. He admits that he can't really go back to the United States. So he's got a problem now because the Germans now are appearing here in Casablanca. So I could talk about this film for 2 or 3 hours without exhausting myself, but I'm not going to do that to you. So I've told you enough now to understand what my question is for the cards. I want to understand, because it's never told to us in the film, one, the reason why Rick can't return to the United States, and two, why is he threatened by Germany, right? Now, the obvious reason, is that, the Germans didn't like you if you weren't one of them, basically. So so Rick was American. I don't know if that targeted him with the Germans enough, but he was American. And, one of the other reasons why a person might have a problem, or Germany might have a problem with a person, is if they were Jewish. And the Jews were not the only people that were killed by the Germans. There was like a list of other people who, the Germans wanted to get rid of. If you weren't if you weren't what they considered pure or perfect, you were at risk. I don't think Rick was probably anything other. My thought about why he was at risk with the Germans is because my guess is that he was Jewish. It was never stated that he was Jewish. Nowhere, anywhere in the story does it ever say Rick was Jewish. But that's my thought going into this reading, is that it probably had to do with his ethnicity. And the other question I have, aside from why he's at risk with the Germans, aside from the fact that who wanted to be under their rule, was why couldn't he go back to the United States? So those are my two questions. So I'm going to go into my meditative place, explain to the universe that this is for fun. It's about a movie. It's not to be taken seriously, but if it could satisfy our curiosity, as if I could tap into AI and say, with all the clues that are given to us in the film, what are the reasons? What is the sound reason that none of us are catching that he can't return to the United States and that he's a target of the Germans? And we'll see what we get. All right. Now, I failed to mention the deck that I'm using is Tarot Sheet Revivals by Sullivan Hismans Chosson deck. Excuse me. Now, notice the date, 1672. Sullivan Hismans seems to be convinced that this deck was created in 1672. And if it were, that makes it one of the earliest, if not the earliest, Tarot of Marseille deck created within Marseille. Now, we know that the style of TDM, a lot of decks are called Tarot of Marseille, right? But only a few were actually made in Marseille. I mean, the first one that we're aware of, or one of the first ones we're aware of, the Noblet, and there's one even earlier than that. But Noblet was made in I think in Paris, and other tarot of Marseille were created in Lyon, France. So the irony is not too many decks were actually created in Marseille that survived to this day, and Chosson is one of them. And since Marseille was a plot point, because after all, you had to get the train to Marseille from Paris in order to escape the Germans when the film begins, it makes sense for me to use a Tarot of Marseille deck. So I'm just handling and mixing the cards a little bit more so that I can satisfy to you that I'm not, pre-staging the cards, and that, the cards are not predetermined. I'm doing this alive. Okay. So we have 8 swords, an even number, the suit of swords. Another sword, the king of swords. Political unrest, perhaps, in the context. Remember, I interpret the cards into the context of to answer the context of the question. So when I see a leader, and then I see swords, the thing, it's like political unrest is where I'm going, and death. Okay. So it verifies that there's political unrest and death is a problem. But it doesn't necessarily tell me why he has to leave Paris, or why he has to fear the Germans, except for death. Maybe because of his political positioning. He's probably his political positions, because some of the things that we're told in the film is that in 1935 he ran guns to Ethiopia, and then 1936 he fought alongside Spaniards against the fascists in Spain. So he has taken political stances, even though if somebody asks him, he'll say, I stick my neck out for no one, but he does, right? So it could be his political connections to fighting on behalf of the underdog could be in and of itself the reason why the Germans might see him as a threat. Now, if we take 8 and 13, we get 21. That would be the quint card for this row. So perhaps this row answers why he has to worry about the Germans. I don't see anything regarding his faith. Okay, the next card. So we have 10 batons. In the context of the questions and in keeping with his swords, social unrest. Oh, another 10. Now this is of cups, and cups and batons are fire and water, right? So they're sort of at odds with one another, right? So his political and emotional predispositions are at odds with one another. And wow, 5 coins. So this row, because this row seems to indicate why he needs to fear the Germans, this row suggests to me why he can't return to the United States. And we see, to me, what I'm interpreting it, two 10s in equal combination, and they're both like opposite kind of energies, right? So we have a problem that doesn't mix together, social issues and emotional issues. And then we have money. Now, one of the things that Renaud suggests, like I mentioned to you earlier in this taping, is that one of the things that Renaud fantasizes about in his mind is that he ran off with money, from the church, or he ran off with a woman, who was married to an important man, or he killed somebody, which could be suggested here as well. This row could spill a little bit into this row. So I guess the clues that we are given by Renaud are probably accurate enough. That a little bit of everything that was spoken about why Rick can't return to the U.S. is probably true. It probably has to do with money to some degree, perhaps the church, because after all, these are chalices, And in the context of the question, I'm reverting my mind to religion, you know? So the absconding with church funds kind of fits in nicely here. And then the social situation, you know, kind of suggests that, you know, he has a problem fitting in the social structure in the United States. Now, I think, what did I say the number was for this one? I think I said we have 8 and 13, 21. So that would be the world card. And here we have 10 and 10 is 20 and 5 is 25. Minus 22 is 3. So we have an Empress here and we have the world card here. So let me pull the Quint cards. Okay, so this is fascinating because in the context of the question, we have a reference to religion, a female pope. Excuse me, the Empress here. I'm actually referring to this one, the female pope, right? Now, the church will say to this day that there was never a female pope and that it's, you know, not a thing. But at the time these decks were created, it was believed by people that there was, in fact, a female pope. Now, a female pope would have been seen as obviously seen as what's the word? An atrocity in the Catholic religion, right? Now, of course, we can't expect to see cards spell out somebody of the Jewish faith, but we can see cards spelling out a religious problem, which the female pope represents. She represents a religious problem, you know, because, and the Germans would have seen anyone of any faith other than what they were as a deviant. So ultimately, Rick was seen as a deviant. It could have been because of his social political values, but it also could have been also that he was of a different faith that they had a problem with. So they could have seen whatever his faith was, which he doesn't seem to be very religious, and he doesn't make any reference to his religion. But, you know, religion and who you are as a person are sometimes tied in with one another culturally, right? So for whatever reasons, he's a deviant of some type. Now, this row, which I dedicated to why he can't go back to America, I think it's very interesting that it's a female in a position of power, often associated to her husband, right? Now, an empress can be someone who's an empress in her own right. But a lot of times, the empress is associated by virtue of being married to the king. To the emperor. So this could be a suggestion, tongue-in-cheek response from the cards that he did abscond with church funds and he did take off with the senator's wife, you know, and this caused social problems for him. You can't go back. Perhaps for good measure. Now, this death card is in line with his problem with the Germans, but it could also be part of the story that maybe he did participate in something that someone died as a result of, you know, and he'd be blamed for it. Now, this card showing up is the quintessential for why he is at risk regarding the Germans. And this one's hard to explain because this is like the ultimate positive card of manifesting whatever your wish is or whatever your end goal is or whatever your end game is. Maybe the Germans fear that he's a threat to them because he can what's the word? Maybe they fear that he can influence enough people to topple them, you know, or to stage a rebellion. You know, they don't want people to rebel. You know, they get rid of the people who rebel. So I'll probably figure this one out better off camera. And, you know, I'm not going to stay on camera all day until I figure it out. I mean, I don't know. It's possible that the world card signifies that he'd be a prize for the Germans to capture. Not as big a prize as Victor Laszlo, who was another character in the film. and this question isn't about Victor Laszlo, but it could just be that, you know, the Germans see Rick as a prize. And even though he might be a prize, it doesn't mean they wouldn't kill him. You know, I mean, they want Victor Laszlo. Victor Laszlo is their big prize. And maybe they're entertaining, Rick, because they think he'll bring them to the prize, because he's in a position to surrender Laszlo to the Germans. And so maybe there's a chance that they're tolerating him in order to get their prize through him. But that doesn't mean that they wouldn't hurt him after they were done with him. And I'm sure Rick is smart enough to know that. So there we have it. I think political unrest and death is his risk if he stays, or if he didn't escape from the Germans, who, in the context of the question, perhaps see him as a gateway to the prize that they have in mind, which could be Victor Laszlo, or it could be just, getting rid of Rick, because Rick has a history of supporting the underdog, and the Germans were not the underdog, so he could be seen as a risk in that regard. Here, for why he can't return to America, it's really tongue-in-cheek. It really seems like it's the same reason Louis says, that you absconded with church funds and you ran off with a senator's wife or something like that. And then this one also suggests some kind of, in the context of the question, some kind of deviancy, right? A female pope is a deviant thing as far as the Catholic Church is concerned. So as far as the Germans are concerned, perhaps Rick's religion was considered deviant, So perhaps, it might be uncovered that he did have some Jewish blood in him, and that was enough. Even if his faith wasn't, even if he didn't actively engage in the Jewish faith, just his bloodline might be deviant enough for them. So I hope you found this video interesting and fun. And, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but if by any chance you happen to have a classic film channel and you just want to talk to somebody about classic film, man, I'd be more than willing to participate, because I just love to talk classic film. And I wish I could talk more about this film, but in the context of answering cards, or answering questions with the cards, I decided to make the video just about that. Until next time, friends, peace, stay well, be kind, and do no harm.